Hi, welcome back to Hey Miss Kelda. This is Kelda Lang Poynott, author and educator. And today's question is, what do you recommend for reading? Well, the first thing I'm going to recommend for reading is to read. From the time your children come into this world, or if even not before, when they're still in utero, read to your children. Read, read, read. Let them see you reading. If you're not a reader, then let's turn on audiobooks and let them hear the written language read to them. If you're not comfortable reading aloud to your children, then do audiobooks. Whatever it is, let them be exposed to the written word. Growing up, we had cereal boxes, and I remember reading cereal boxes at breakfast every single morning. And everything that we could get our hands on, we read for knowledge. We read newspapers, we read comic strips, we read everything. And now with videos and YouTube and, so much electronics that's not the written word, that we're still getting information, but it's different. And our reading comprehension just isn't as accurate as it once was, I think, because we're not exposed to the written word quite as much. It's not a priority to get information. So, what do I recommend for reading is to read. But there are different elements to reading. We read for enjoyment, we read for information, and we also do read alouds. So, when you're looking at your curriculum, consider read alouds that are going to be probably chapter books, things that are above your child's ability to read on their own, and that really bring the family in together. That it's a community thing. And if this is something that you do listen to as audiobooks, we listen to audiobooks forever in our car running errands. Um, History books, we listen to chapter books, we listen to books that were about to be made into movies, we listened to classical books. It didn't matter. We just always had books in the car when we traveled or when we ran around town. Many times we would listen to them at night before we went to bed. I realized that I was not going to be able to read The Hobbit out loud to my children because I didn't speak Dwarvish or Elvish. And so I also enjoyed audiobooks while we were having lunch every day. I'd be making lunch and we'd pop in an audiobook and we would begin listening. With digital downloads and Audible, there's no excuse not to have constantly being read to. So that's what worked for our family. But reading aloud, if that's something that is if you're comfortable with that, then I would begin at a very early age with read alouds and just read to our children. Because then they want the written word. They desire it. They're hungry for it. It could be any kind of thing that you read to them. It could be magazines, articles, newspapers, whatever, is that we're exposing our children to the written word. So read alouds is one. For information for school, we're going to be reading science books and history books, and we're going to be reading readers, and that is for academic reasons. But I also want there to be an enjoyment factor to reading. What is your child interested in? If they're interested in fiction or nonfiction, I raised my children on nonfiction, fantasy, any kind of book that would captivate their attention span. We read a lot about mice and dragons, and we read a great deal about um, the fantasy world of, just made up worlds of Tolkien and Lewis and, Rowling. So we were immersed in fantasy. Ironically, my children don't read a lot of fiction and fantasy these days. They prefer to read nonfiction. They prefer to read historical accounts of things. They love anything that has a mystery around it. And so I kind of think they've gotten the best of both worlds, but their interests were definitely, once they got older and chose their own read alouds, chose their own enjoyment, was more nonfiction. I also recommend for reading is that moms and dads, you guys need to be leading the example. You need to be reading yourselves for your own information, for your own enjoyment. Whatever that is, you need to be the example of good reading. With reading comes better communication, Strong readers are better writers. Strong readers have higher vocabularies. It all goes along with that. Yes, I know we have reluctant readers, but once they get into something that they really enjoy and you let them pick what they want to read, suddenly they're readers and they get into a series or they get into something that they're really interested in and they want to just read about that. It could be about ancient coins, it could be about dinosaurs. It doesn't matter the content as long as they're reading. Now, if you have a voracious reader and someone who's just going to be leaps and bounds above, beyond you, then I would recommend that you try your very best to keep up with them so that you know what they're reading, you understand the content that they're absorbing, and that you can have real discussions with your children. So there doesn't need to be book reports or AR tests or anything like that because you know that they're getting the meaning and they're absorbing the content of that material because they're able to narrate it back to you. They're able to articulate their answers. They're able to share with you what they like and what they dislike, what bothered them. There are emotional factors that help them to process really strong emotions sometimes through literature. I believe that that is a way that helps our children mature. It helps with their development. If they cry over a character or a scenario, if they're upset at the ending of a book, then you know they were into it. If they are so satisfied and they close the book and they can't wait to start the next one, then you also know that they're satisfied in the story, in the information. If they're frustrated with reading, then sometimes we back up, we read something a little easier, and then we move forward. But I will never tell a child that they're, unless it's a content of something that's just too mature for them or might be too upsetting for them, I do not limit a child's desire to read beyond their grade level or their reading level. I never, because I think that those challenges really do make them persevere. It makes them have a longer attention span, and they're willing to face challenges in order to get the story or in order to get the information that they want. And that builds more character than anything that that we can really put our fingers on in other ways when a reader wants to read more and be on their level. So, what do I recommend for reading? It's to read, whether it's a Bible story, poetry, um, I don't know, plays, Shakespeare. Shakespeare was intended to be watched, but I also think that we need to read to understand the language a little bit, and then we can watch it or listen to it maybe, or watch it as we're reading along so that we understand the timing of those words and the poetry of his and the prose and poetry of his writing. I also believe that more challenging writing is sometimes better in combination with audio because, and I know I'm a very strong audio learner, so I know I go that route a lot of times. But if it's going to be words that are unfamiliar, or if it's a time in history, Dickens, Austen, though we don't speak like that anymore. So sometimes it's easier to hear it spoken so that you hear the rhythm and you hear the way that the words flow so that you understand. It's called fluency. So that you have a better understanding of how those words fit together. So when they're exposed to those words again, or they read that author again, they've heard it. They know how it's supposed to be spoken. They know how the rhythm of that writing fits into the storyline and enhances the storyline. So read, read, read. That's what I say. Read, read, read. And continue to read for enjoyment, for information, and as a family with read alouds, with audiobooks or read alouds. If you are interested in contacting me or subscribing to my Patreon account for access to workshops, please go to patreon.com, Kelda Poynott. I also publish different information on Facebook on my author page, Kelda Pointot Author. You can email me, and all of my written works are on Amazon.com.